अनुच्छेद 140 सर्वोच्च न्यायालय की सहायक शक्तियों से जुड़ा है। संसद कानून सम्मत प्रावधानों के माध्यम से सर्वोच्च न्यायालय को ऐसी पूरक शक्तियां प्रदान कर सकती है जो आवश्यक या वांछनीय हो। इसका मकसद संविधान से मिले न्यायालय के अधिकार क्षेत्र को सबल और प्रभावी बनाना है।
Bilateral relations between India and the United Arab Emirates. In fact, the External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar, who is on a visit to UAE, held a round of productive interaction with his UAE counterpart Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, where the two leaders discussed the entire gamut of bilateral relations, especially the strong focus on economic recovery post-COVID-19. Jaishankar's visit to the United Arab Emirates comes amid the evolving geopolitical development and situation in the region, particularly in Afghanistan there. So we'll try and understand in a deeper sense the cooperation which exists between both the nations and the way both countries want to move further and take this bilateral relationship on the path to further stronger bonds. And for more on this, we're joined by two distinguished experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Professor Harshvi Pant, the head of Strategic Studies program at ORF. And we're also joined by former Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. Welcome, both of you gentlemen. Let me begin with you, Ambassador Trigunayat. Let's start by understanding the kind of relations, the kind of cooperation which both nations, India and United Arab Emirates, have shared so far.
You know, Vishal, the relationship between India and UAE now is nearly 50 years old, ever since 1972, when we established diplomatic relations. And the relationship has, in the past 5 years, has really become truly comprehensive strategic partnership in many ways, apart from being simply transactional or a bilateral relationship. We have the largest numbers of Indians there, 3.3 million Indians. Nearly 24% of the remittances, total remittances that come, $18.5 billion come from there. They are our preferred partner in energy security. They are our partners in food security. They have committed to about $75 billion investments in India. The exchanges at the highest level in the past few years have been amazing. Not only the Prime Minister Modi visited there 3 times himself and was conferred with the highest honor, we also had the Crown Prince come and become our chief guest at on the Republic Day. I mean, that is something that shows, and India has become their first strategic partner. They have signed an agreement where not only us. So from their perspective and our perspective, not only the economic engagement between the two countries, as Dr. Jaishankar will be talking exactly how the recovery will take place, but what is most important is that our relationship has become, we are their second largest trading partner and they are our third largest trading partner with $60 billion in trade. As it's a major transit hub for India. Indian companies roughly invested about $85 billion in UAE. We have about 5,000 Indian companies operating there across the spectrum. And likewise, the UAE has been investing quite a bit in India, about $14-15 million, but they are looking to increase their footprint in the strategic reserves and refineries and the real estate and construction activities. So across the spectrum. The most important thing about the relationship, I would say, is that it has become a relationship of trust, where at the leadership level as well as at the popular level, the kind of understanding about each other's concerns. For example, earlier, in 2019, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj was invited to speak at the OIC meeting, right? That has happened in the last so many years. It not happened, and the Pakistanis continued to object. But the UAE invited her as a special guest, and she delivered her address. That was the first time. That was a change in the mindset. When Pulwama happened or the Balakot happened, the UAE or Article 70, the UAE has been very appreciative of India's stand, has supported India, has, of course, they want to support a little bit of a friendship between India and Pakistan. That is the preferred choice. But at the same time, they have definitely and very openly and categorically support India's stance in the international domain. And today our relationship has moved into another domain, that is space, that is nuclear cooperation, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, COVID, and all kinds of things. And with the Abraham Accords signed with Israel, I think that there are more opportunities that are going to grow.
Okay, indeed, we're going to talk about those opportunities there as well. But as you pointed out, mutual trust is the key word between the both nations here, India and United Arab Emirates. Professor Pant, trade, economy, remittances. Apart from that, what are the key focus areas between these two nations when we talk about bilateral cooperation?
Vishal, this relationship, India's relationship with the UAE is now almost the anchor of India's engagement in the larger Middle East and West Asia, and I think that's the real paradigmatic shift, that if one can call that, because in that sense, what we are looking at, today is that India's extended neighborhood, or whether it's India's look west policy. There you see at the very heart of it lies UAE, and all the things that Ambassador Tigunayat has said actually amplify that relationship to an extent which was something unheard of, unthinkable just a few years back. And so therefore the breadth and the width, the depth of this relationship today is significantly sharper, significantly stronger than any time in recent past. And that's what we are looking at, this factor of trust, this factor that you can UAE can talk about engaging India and Pakistan, and Indians and Indians in particular, that we have been very sensitive about third party mediation, but we are not really, official response have been quite muted about it. So in that sense, the idea that UAE can actually have the trust of India to such an extent is remarkable. And the fact that both countries are engaged today as partners as they redefine their economic priorities is quite remarkable. Also, the fact that you are looking at Gulf and Indian Ocean today as one maritime space, one maritime geography, which is quite important, because a lot of what is happening there, a lot of what is happening in the Indian Ocean today is connected via, of course, India's larger argument about Indo-Pacific, but also what the Gulf is looking at. The Gulf is looking at a remarkable geopolitical, geostrategic transformation where Indo-Pacific is going to be at the heart of it. They are looking at a completely changed relationship with the West. And they're looking at partners like India that can deliver on the 21st century requirements. So if you read UAE's vision about their economy, their knowledge economy on which they want to base their next generation, I think India plays a very important role in that imagination. And we are already witnessing some of the efforts, whether in terms of high technology cooperation, whether in terms of space and nuclear, of course, but also in terms of artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, biotech, etc., where the two countries are actually now operationalizing the worldview that they have created. And I think that's the most important aspect, that the two countries today can look at their requirements through very similar prisms and come to then occupy a special place in each other's foreign policy calculus, which again gives India extreme great degree of confidence in its Middle East policy, and UAE a great degree of confidence in its ability to navigate the turbulent waters of the Indo-Pacific in the future.
Okay, indeed, those are very quite important dimensions of that cooperation between both the nations. But Mr. Tigunayat, from your perspective, the why and how of UAE's significance vis-a-vis India's Middle East policy there?
Well, as Professor Pant said, that this has become sort of an anchor for the key issues. Let me say, most of the Middle East has been one special thing that stands out as far as UAE is concerned is that they do not have the kind of religious domination that Saudi Arabia, the largest economy of the place, has. So what they have done is they have tried to come up as a country where all religions are equal. They have nearly 200 nationalities in the country. They believe in the tolerance, and they have a ministry of tolerance. And they gave a land for Indian temple also. The Pope visited there. So it is trying to project itself as a middle power, which is, in my view, far more innovative in its foreign policy choices, and which it exercises, whether it was normalizing relations with the Israelis, or whether going and working in Yemen or elsewhere with Saudi Arabia. So it is also flexing its muscles as far as the regional geopolitics is concerned. Secondly, you will see, while it's extremely close and has very close ties with Saudi Arabia, but virtually a defense and security partnership, bilateral partnership that it had come up. It is also has good relations with Iran. The largest Iranian investments are actually in the UAE. And when they were signing these Abraham Accords, their foreign minister clearly said that this is not against Iran, this Abraham Accord. This is essentially we're looking at other powers who are external to the region, and that was mentioning Turkey in the particular aspect. So what I feel is that they are looking at this transformation and the certain withdrawal of the United States from the security umbrella of this region and towards Indo-Pacific. So they are also gearing up their policy in that direction. And the UAE definitely figures in our concept of the Indo-Pacific, Oman, UAE, and some of the countries of the region in the Western Asia, from the West Asia part in the Asian Ocean. And the fact that they are keen on engaging the ties and creating stakes for India and Indian stakes in the country. That's why it becomes more important for us. Besides, in every regional domain, you will find that UAE is very much present, taking lead. And they're like, what I find that they have gained in the past a greater acceptance compared to some other countries in the Gulf is because of their rather secular kind of a policies that the country has been following. The World Tolerance Summit, and having a Ministry of Happiness. I mean, no other country has. First woman going to space and launching in Mars. I mean, they are really having ambitions that are gigantic. That puts them apart compared to other countries in the region.
Okay. Let's also look at closer home here in terms of the significance of the relationship or the cooperation between India and UAE, and therein comes the Afghan theatre. Professor Pant, how do you see India-UAE close cooperation having an impact there? Because obviously both nations, India more so, has a lot of interest there.
Yes, I think UAE's role and whatever we have been reading for the last few weeks in the media about UAE trying to push or trying to make a case for India-Pakistan talks, I think is an interesting, whatever the merits of that, I think it's an interesting idea that for UAE today it's imperative that stability in the larger Middle East South Asia region holds. Because for a country like UAE that is looking at the future, as Ambassador was pointing out, with a larger, very expansive ambitions, with larger designs, and with a very futuristic orientation, India is a very natural partner. So therefore, what important changes, important shifts that we have seen in UAE's approach towards India, free of the ideological shibboleths of the past, I think is a major improvement, is a major shift in the larger Middle Eastern perspective towards India, and it can be a precursor to a larger shift. What in the region perhaps they would want is the kind of extremism that will emerge if a Taliban-like entity takes part in Afghanistan, if extremists become really the determining actors in Afghanistan after Americans leave, which now they have declared they would be withdrawing their forces by September 11th, 2021. There is going to be a remarkable churn in the region, and all the stakeholders would like now to at least give a last push for some kind of a engagement with each other, so that the realities post-American withdrawal are not as starkly negative as are being made out. And in that context, for UAE also to pitch in and say that, look, we want countries like India and Pakistan to start engaging with each other, not only for their own bilateral engagements, but also for the larger impact it will have on the region and beyond, is something that makes sense from their perspective. From India's perspective, of course, India has shown that the talks with Pakistan will be on India's terms. We have shown that we can deal with Pakistan militarily. We have shown we can deal with Pakistan diplomatically. We have seen that even when we announced the revocation of Article 370, Pakistan tried to make it internationalize it. It didn't cut much ice. So clearly, in more ways than one, India has shown to the world that Pakistan is really a non-entity as far as our calculations are concerned. But for a country like UAE, Pakistan is very important. Of course, given their ideological linkages, given their religious linkages, and given their past relationship. And so as a new friend that they are creating in India, they would like the India-Pakistan relationship to have a stabilizing impact. And so it's not surprising that they want an engagement between two major South Asian countries, as well as greater degree of stability in Afghanistan, which can be a precursor to a larger South Asia, Middle Eastern stability. Because if that does not happen, then I think the consequences both for India that wants to weather the storm of extremism and for moderate countries like UAE in the Middle East would be quite catastrophic. And I think no other country in Middle East, in West Asia, recognizes this as starkly as UAE does. For all the reasons that Ambassador Trigunat pointed out, they are a moderate state. They are looking at the world through a very moderate lens, and they are engaging the world keeping in mind the contemporary 21st century reality. So I think there is much at stake here for them, and there is much at stake here for us. So both of us would like Afghanistan to be stable, Afghanistan to be secure, Afghanistan to be prosperous, with fundamental democratic regime taking place, not a Taliban-like Taliban variety of regime. And I think that's why it is very natural for both the countries to talk about it, to work, and to see how far they can work together in making sure that some semblance of normalcy returns to Afghanistan post September 11, 2020-21.
Indeed, peace and stability in Afghanistan seemingly is the common goal here, both for India and UAE. And Mr. Trigunat, your views there on the impact of larger cooperation between India and UAE on, these regional issues here closer home, specifically if you're looking at Afghan theatre, as Professor Pant is pointing out, there is a common goal out there. How it would impact?
Well, as Professor Pant has really explained it in great detail, all the nuances and the way it would go. But I also fully agree with that. I mean, that is the stable Afghanistan essentially is in everybody's interest, and that is something which seems a bit unlikely now, as the US has really decided on a date. So everybody in the region and everywhere else, including India, is trying to work out on the modalities whereby the impact or a negative fallout is minimized. Because see, Taliban wants the Americans to leave tomorrow, but that is not going to happen. Okay, September 11th is not very far off. But at the same time, what in the interim is the Afghan government capable of taking on? What will be the alternate modalities? Whether they are thinking of some kind of a UN presence in which the other countries could participate. And the UAE is also one of the countries that does subscribe and provide peacekeepers here and there. So that could be one of the possibilities in which they could work. But for all this to happen, Pakistan also plays a very crucial role. As you are aware that Taliban was actually the creation of US, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, the three countries, in 1970, late 70s, when they fought against the Soviets, and since then. But today, all the major powers are invested in Afghanistan for obvious reasons. They have their own strategic reasons, they have the economic reasons. And Americans are no longer interested in Afghanistan in that sense of the term. I have recalled that in discussions with many of the different countries and partners, that they don't like America being there, but they don't want America to leave either. I mean, that is something that is a very strange phenomenon.
Indeed.
But what we, from India's point of view also, because see, they tried to keep us out of the negotiations, even though it impacts directly a great deal on us. But now that India has become a kind of a mover in this whole domain, and the Afghan government wants India to be a part, and we have taken a very clear, actually at the Raisina dialogue the other day, there was a very engaging discussion with Jawad Zarif and the NSA of Afghanistan, the new one, and our external affairs minister. And so we have very clearly said that what we want, but Pakistan has to play its role. So far, what Pakistan has done in Afghanistan, it knows that that is the Afghan card it holds. Afghan card means Taliban card, means several other groups from Pakistan have moved into Afghanistan, when they come under FATF. So many groups, Al-Qaeda related or some others, they have just moved into Afghanistan and creating destabilization there. And today, in fact, Ashraf Ghani has said the same thing. So Pakistan tries to encash its nuisance value every time vis-a-vis the big powers.
Okay.
In this whole. UAE has a certain hold on Pakistan. And I think that UAE does understand, especially because, see, the Pakistanis need a lot of assistance from the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Both, they don't want to. There are other reasons for that, but they don't want them to be angry with them for some reason or the other. And they are beseeching them to assist. So I think at this time, what the UAE can do with Pakistan, and Pakistani foreign minister happens to be in UAE at the same time, to basically have a sobering influence. trying to be a responsible power in this. And this is what the Gulf countries, major GCC countries, have understood, that Pakistan has not been playing the correct role that as a responsible power or a country should be playing. So that is something that they are trying to do. That. So in my thinking, I think UAE can play a little moderating role on Pakistan, which I'm sure they are interested in, because Pakistan also wants to get out of the block that it has been closeted.
Okay. Indeed, that is one area where UAE might come really handy when we talk about the Afghan theatre. They are coming back to the economic part, and to the concluding question here, Professor Pant, to you, in terms of the economic aspect of the bilateral cooperation here. How is it that you think both countries can help each other specifically to mitigate the impact of the COVID pandemic? Because that also seemingly is one of the focus areas between the recent, talks between both the External Affairs Minister of India as well as his UAE counterpart.
Any conversation these days, and I think for the foreseeable future, will have to take into account the economic realities that COVID-19 has created and how the governments across the world can respond to it. I think a lot of the plans that governments have made are coming undone because of wave after wave that is hitting the governments, hitting the countries. So nations are really, are having to respond in real time. And unless there is some degree of coordination and cross-national cooperation, economic recovery would be very difficult. And that's, I think, more and more countries are recognizing this, especially those that have a stake in how the global economic order evolves post-COVID-19. And for two countries like India and the UAE, this is imperative, because you may recall, the earlier conversation that you were having with the ambassador, and if you look at the expanse of the economic engagement, investment, you look at energy security, whether you're looking at diaspora remittances, whether you're looking at sovereign wealth funds. All of these mean that unless global economic recovery happens fast, unless it moves in a direction that is more sustainable, it would be very difficult for emerging economies like India and UAE to make full use of the larger dynamic at play. And therefore, for India, it is imperative that it has these kind of conversations regularly, and also tries to make a case that, look, the challenge is there, but given those challenges, what can be done? Both countries are young. There is a demographic dividend at play. That both countries are looking at the fourth industrial revolution. Both countries are looking at emerging technologies. What can be done to harness these opportunities at a time of great challenge? And I think those conversations are becoming more regular because the challenge is out there, and perhaps what you were telling us about Dr. Jaishankar's visit and what was discussed underscores the urgency of these kind of conversations. That at the end of the day, it is these conversations, this kind of an engagement that is going to help us more than, say, larger strategic mapping at this particular point, because those strategic imperatives are today beholden to whether we can get our economic act right. And given the pandemic, it's no one is really sure what might happen. So I think the economic challenge and the economic partnership with UAE has been very robust and has been growing very, very actively for the last few years. How can we tap that? How can we tap into that at a time of great distress is going to be a challenge both for New Delhi and for UAE. And hopefully, the kind of high-level interactions that we are seeing today and that will continue hopefully in the future will help us alleviate some of those concerns.
Indeed, the immediate challenge, as both of you are pointing out, for both the countries and most of the nations right now is to go ahead and tackle the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much there, Professor Harsh Pant, as well as Mr. Anil Trigunayat, for sharing your views and insights on the entire gamut of a relationship between India and UAE, the way this bond has strengthened over the years with more mutual trust and respect, and also various aspects of how this relationship can impact not only the bilateral cooperation in various sectors, but also in geopolitical and strategic.
India Inc. seeks feedback from business leaders to deal with the impact of second COVID wave on economy. Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla chairs a meeting with presiding officers to discuss the COVID-19 situation. And campaigning ends for the 6th phase polling in West Bengal. 43 assembly seats spread over 4 districts to vote on the 22nd of April. The Election Commission curtails campaign time in view of rising cases. The biggest story of the day today, the government has announced liberalized and accelerated phase 3 strategy of COVID-19 vaccination from the 1st of May, from when everyone above the age of 18 years will be eligible to get COVID-19 vaccine. The decision was taken after Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a series of meetings amid a steep rise in COVID cases in the country. The Prime Minister interacted with leading doctors and top pharma companies on the prevailing situation. And after the meeting, in a statement, the government said pricing, procurement, eligibility and administration of vaccine is being made flexible in phase 3 of the ongoing vaccination drive. The states will be empowered to procure additional vaccine doses directly from the manufacturers, as well as open up vaccination to any category of people above the age of 18 for the same. Vaccine manufacturers will be allowed to release up to 50% of their supply to the state governments and in the open market at a pre-declared price. So far, the government had allowed vaccinations only for healthcare workers, the frontline workers, and those above the age of 45. The cumulative number of COVID-19 vaccine doses administered in the country has crossed 12 crore 38 lakh as part of the world's largest vaccination drive against coronavirus. Over 12 lakh vaccination doses were administered in the last 24 hours. Amid the rapid surge in coronavirus cases in Delhi, Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal announced a 6-day lockdown in the national capital from 10 p.m. tonight to 5 a.m. next Monday. Arvind Kejriwal said the move was necessary as rising COVID cases had severely strained the city's resources and stretched the city's health system to its limits. Addressing a press conference virtually, the Chief Minister of Delhi said the lockdown is needed to prevent the health system from collapsing under the increasing number of patients, as there is an acute shortage of medicines, beds, ICUs, and also oxygen. Noting that the decision to impose lockdown was not an easy one, Kejriwal appealed to migrants in the city not to leave Delhi.
हमारा हेल्थ सिस्टम अब बहुत ज़्यादा तनाव में है। मैं ये नहीं कहूँगा कि हमारा हेल्थ सिस्टम अभी कोलैप्स किया है, लेकिन आज हमारा हेल्थ सिस्टम बहुत ज़्यादा तनाव में है। तो आज रात को 10 बजे से अगले सोमवार को सुबह 5 बजे तक 6 दिन के लिए दिल्ली में लॉकडाउन लगाया जा रहा है। इस दौरान जाहिर है कि जो एसेंशियल सर्विसेज हैं वो जारी रहेंगी, खाने पीने की, मेडिकल व्यवस्थाओं की वो जारी रहेंगी। ये शादियों का सीज़न है, लोगों के बड़े मुश्किल से रिश्ते बनते हैं, हम उनके रिश्ते तोड़ना नहीं चाहते, तो लोगों की शादियां संपन्न हों, लेकिन केवल 50 लोगों के गैदरिंग के साथ संपन्न हो। पिछली बार जब देश में लॉकडाउन लगा था, हमने देखा कि किस तरह बड़ी संख्या में प्रवासी मजदूर अपने गांव जाने लगे थे। उनसे मैं खास तौर से हाथ जोड़ के अपील करना चाहता हूं, ये छोटा सा लॉकडाउन है, 6 दिन का, दिल्ली छोड़ के मत जाइएगा।
During the nearly week-long restrictions, only essential services will be allowed, which means medical shops, groceries and hospitals will remain open. Pregnant women and patients going for medical services will be allowed. People going for COVID-19 testing or vaccination are also exempt on the production of a valid I-card. Those going to airports, railway stations, bus terminals have also been allowed movement, but they too have to show a valid ticket. Electronic and print media persons have also been exempted from the restrictions, but private offices and other establishments like shops, malls, manufacturing units, educational institutes, cinema halls, restaurants, bars, public parks, gyms and salons will remain closed. Delhi is the worst hit city in the country, with 25,500 fresh cases reported on Sunday and almost 1/3 of those tested returning positive. Meanwhile, the DRDO reopened its COVID hospital in Delhi Cant area to deal with the massive spike in infections in the city. The facility is now functional with 250 beds and will be upgraded to 500 beds in the coming days. India reported its highest ever single-day spike of COVID cases and more than 1,600 deaths in the last 24 hours. The states reported a record high of 273,810 infections on Monday morning, the fifth consecutive day of more than 2 lakh cases from across the country. Maharashtra reported the highest daily new cases at 68,631, followed by Uttar Pradesh with 30,566 cases, while Delhi reported 25,462 new cases. India's total active case load has now reached 19,29,000 and comprises 12.81% of the country's total infections. Talking about recoveries, 1,44,000 recoveries have also been registered in the last 24 hours, while a total of 1,600 deaths were reported in a span of 24 hours. 10 states account for 85.11% of the new deaths, according to the Union Health Ministry. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has said she has taken inputs from various industry chambers on concerns of India Inc. with regard to the management of the COVID pandemic. She added that the centre would continue to work with state governments to save lives and livelihood. She sought feedback from businesses to deal with the impact of the second COVID-19 wave on the country's economy. The Finance Minister held interactions with heads of industry chambers, including the President of CII, the FICCI President and also the ASSOCHAM Chief. India has barred the supply of oxygen to many industries to meet the rising demand from hospitals, which are under tremendous pressure from a surge in COVID infections in the country. The decision will be effective from the 22nd of April. In a letter sent to Chief Secretaries of all states, Union Home Secretary Ajay Bhalla asked them to take all measures to prohibit supply of oxygen for industrial purposes except those exempted. The Union Health Ministry, meanwhile, has informed that 162 pressure swing absorption oxygen plants have been sanctioned by the centre for installation in public health facilities in all states of the country. These will augment medical oxygen capacity by 154 metric tons. The Railways has also said it will run oxygen express trains over the next few days to transport liquid medical oxygen and oxygen cylinders across the country.
ऑक्सीजन सिलेंडर्स अथवा टैंकर्स को रेलवे के द्वारा पहुंचाने का काम भी शुरू करने का निर्णय ले लिया है। सिलेंडर्स तो तुरंत शुरू कर दिए गए। जिस राज्य को अपने सिलेंडर्स रेल द्वारा पहुंचाने हो दूसरी जगह तक या लाने हो कोई दूर दराज की जगह से, रेलवे तुरंत उसको उपलब्ध कराएगी और ग्रीन कॉरिडोर उन ट्रेनों को चलाया जाए बिना कोई रोक के। हाई स्पीड पे ये फ्रेट ट्रेन्स को अपने गंतव्य स्थान तक पहुंचाया जाए।
And Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla held a virtual meeting of presiding officers of the state assemblies on Monday to discuss the COVID-19 situation in the country and the role of the public representatives. Addressing the meet, the Speaker said, to contain the spread of COVID-19, we all need to work in tandem and on a war footing. He added that in these tough times, it is the responsibility of all presiding officers and leaders to stand by people. Om Birla further said, through public representatives of our respective states, we need to spread awareness among people to follow all COVID protocols. He also stated that we need to send the message that observance of precautions is the biggest weapon in the fight against this pandemic.
संकट की इस घड़ी में विधायिका को भी और अधिक तत्परता से अपने कर्तव्य को निभाना है। मेरा मानना है कि कोरोना के प्रसार को रोकने के लिए हम सबको सामूहिक रूप से युद्ध स्तर पर काम करने की आवश्यकता है। साथियों, लोकतंत्र में जनप्रतिनिधियों की भूमिका बड़ी महत्वपूर्ण होती है। हम जनता और सरकार के बीच सेतु का कार्य करते हैं। आज समय है कि हम पूरी एकजुटता और सामूहिकता की भावना से अपने कर्तव्यों का पालन करें तथा समाज और देश को इस आपदा से शीघ्र मुक्ति दिलाने में अपना योगदान दें।
The Union Health Ministry announced on Monday that all claims of COVID warriors under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan package will be settled till the 24th of April, after which a fresh insurance policy for them will become effective. In a Twitter message, the ministry said that a new dispensation will be provided to cover the corona warriors. For this, the ministry is in talks with the New India Assurance. The scheme, which provides an insurance cover of 50 lakh rupees, was announced in March last year to provide a safety net to the health workers of the country. The scheme has also provided a safety net to the dependents of the coronavirus warriors who lost their lives to the disease in the past 1 year. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has cancelled his planned visit to India next week due to the coronavirus situation in the country. Johnson will now hold the meeting virtually with Prime Minister Modi later this month to launch their plans for the future UK-India partnership. Both sides were to agree on a roadmap 2030 for re-energized India-UK relations across trade and investment and climate action, which is now likely to be signed off remotely. The statement was released by Downing Street on behalf of the British and Indian governments. Time for a short break here. More news and updates will continue on the other side. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching News Tonight. On a 3-day visit to Abu Dhabi, External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar held talks with his UAE counterpart, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, on Monday. The two leaders discussed the entire gamut of bilateral relations with a strong focus on economic recovery post-COVID-19. They also deliberated on the latest COVID-19 developments, the two countries' efforts to contain its repercussions, and the global efforts to provide vaccine to all countries. And news now from pole-bound Bengal. Campaigning for the 6th phase of assembly elections in West Bengal ended on Monday evening. In view of rising cases of COVID-19, the Election Commission has decided to curtail the campaign timing for the remaining 3 phases of the 8-phase assembly elections in the state. During the 6th phase, a total of 306 candidates will be vying for the 43 assembly seats spread over 4 districts. Polling will be held on the 22nd of April. The ruling Trinamool Congress and the BJP are contesting on all 43 seats, while the CPIM is contesting on 23 seats, the Congress on 12. The counting of votes will take place on the 2nd of May. Polling for the 2nd phase of Panchayat elections in 20 districts of Uttar Pradesh ended on Monday. Voting, which began at 7 a.m., concluded at 6 p.m. Strict adherence to the COVID-19 protocol during the polling was issued by the State Election Commission amid growing cases of coronavirus in the state. The districts which went to polls included Lucknow, Varanasi, Azamgarh, Etawah, Chitrakoot, Bagpat, Muzaffarnagar, Gautam Budh Nagar, Bijnor, Amroha, Badaयूं, Etah, Mainpuri, Kannauj, Lalitpur, Pratapgarh, Sultanpur, Lakhimpur Kheri, Gonda and Maharajganj. The Uttar Pradesh Panchayat elections were held in 4 phases. Voting will take place on the 26th of April and the 29th of April for the next 2 phases that are remaining. The votes will be counted on the 2nd of May. NASA successfully flew its tiny helicopter Ingenuity on Mars on Monday, the first powered flight on another planet. The triumph was hailed as a Wright brothers moment. Confirmation came via satellite at Mars, which relayed the chopper's data back to Earth. The mini 1.8 kg copter, named Ingenuity, carried a bit of wing fabric from the 1903 Wright Flyer, which made similar history at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. The space agency is promising more adventurous flights in the days ahead. So that's it from us in this bulletin. But before I wrap up, an appeal once again to all our viewers: continue to maintain COVID-appropriate behavior. That is, remember to wear your face masks, wash your hands and face regularly, and also ensure that you maintain physical